Just imagine that. Someone living in your house for a year and you don't even know they're there. They're eating your food. Crazy.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Gene's Reviews. Reviews from a regular dude, where I do trailer reactions, I react to YouTube videos, I review YouTube channels. Occasionally, I'll review a movie, but really, I just do whatever the hell I want.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Gene's Reviews. Reviews from a regular dude. Today, we're doing one from Top 5 Unknowns. This is 5 scary stories of missing people found living in other people's homes. How would you like that if you came home and heard something up in the attic and went to explore and there's some transient living up there or something?
It's not that often that paranormal activity is the preferred explanation for unusual happenings. But if the alternative is that a creepy person is living in your home without your knowledge, as is the case with these scary stories, you might wish it was just a ghost that was leaving your doors open and stealing your food.
I don't think so. Well, maybe.
Number 5. The story of Tatsuko Horikawa is probably the most famous on this list. It spawned copycats looking for internet fame and independent movies, but the original story was terrifying on its own. It began with an unknown Japanese man in his 50s. He lived alone in the city of Kasuya. Kasuya isn't a major city, and while growing in terms of the number of residents, it doesn't have the same homelessness problems seen elsewhere in the country. Homelessness was the last thing on this anonymous man's mind when he went about his life in 2008. More pressing to him,
That picture's from something else. It's another video that I've seen about somebody that was doing the same thing.
was the fact that his food seemed to be going missing from his fridge. It wasn't a large amount. It went unnoticed at first. When he eventually did notice, the man assumed he had been sleepwalking. This wasn't something he had ever done before, and there were no major events going on in his life that could have caused sleepwalking due to stress. But as he lived alone, it was the only explanation he had. The man tried to put the disappearances to the back of his mind, but food continued to go missing. He would also find things that had been moved around ever so slightly. He began to think a thief may be responsible. No valuables were ever stolen, even things that weren't locked away. Only
If food's missing, I would be tearing the house apart, looking everywhere to see if someone was in there.
food was ever taken. It was strange, but after the man ruled out sleepwalking, there was really no other explanation. The man went to great lengths to secure his home, but it seemed to not deter the thief. There was also no sign of forced entry. At this point, he began to fear he was going insane. Desperate to prove this was really happening, the man bought a number of cameras which he would connect to his phone. An app would alert him if the cameras detected any movement. Finally, he found some creepy proof of a person that really was taking his food. The camera showed a woman taking a meal from the man's fridge. She then sat on his sofa to watch TV and eat the food. When she was done, she cleaned up, making sure to leave no trace of herself, and disappeared off camera. The footage was of too poor of a quality to make out her face, but that didn't matter. He knew she shouldn't have been in his home.
Right.
The man contacted police, who went to the house and found it completely secure. Once inside, they conducted a thorough search of the house. In a closet in a rarely used room, police found Tatsuko Horikawa curled up on a thin futon on the top shelf. She was 58 years old and homeless. Tatsuko told police she'd gotten into the house about a year earlier when the man forgot to lock his front door. She'd been living there ever since, eating his food and using the bathroom when he was at work. She was described as perfectly neat and clean.
Just imagine that. Someone living in your house for a year and you don't even know they're there. They're eating your food. Crazy. Crazy.
Because she hadn't stolen any valuables, she was only charged with trespassing and made to leave her tiny home. Number 4. Even though the scary true story made its way into newspapers around the world, little is known about this case beyond what was originally reported. The incident took place in Arlington, Virginia in 2017. The town had been taking drastic steps to decrease homelessness, but there were still hundreds of people with no other option than living on the streets. One of these people was Anthony Jones, a 60-year-old African-American man. Sometime in the early summer of 2017, he found a sliding glass door to a house on 22nd Street South unlocked. Without being seen or heard by the occupant or her neighbors, Anthony slipped inside and got settled into the attic. It's not clear if Anthony knew it at the time, but the house was only occupied by a single elderly woman. The woman living in the house asked to not be named in the press and remains anonymous. It was the early hours of the morning of July 25th when the woman heard strange noises coming from above her. Usually, it would be easy to dismiss this as the house settling, or maybe even an animal that had gotten inside.
Yeah, it could be rodents.
But to the woman, it sounded far too much like the shuffling of
Right.
footsteps to ignore. The woman called her landlord, expecting to hear his ringtone coming from the attic. Sometimes he would use the attic as a storage space. Like something from a horror film, her landlord told her it wasn't him. He called the police, who arrived at 1:30 a.m. They entered the house from a staircase at the back and called for anyone who was there to come out. Anthony surrendered and was taken into police custody. Police found his backpack, clothing, and bedding in the corner, but it was impossible to tell how long he'd actually been there.
The jig's up, buddy.
Number 3.
I feel almost bad for some of these because they have nowhere to go. They're desperate. They're going to do what they can do, to get some shelter.
It was February of 2019 when college student Maddie came home from her lunch break to hear her closet doors rattling. This was just the latest in a string of strange occurrences that she was beginning to attribute to ghosts. Maddie was a junior at the University of North Carolina at Greensboro, in an apartment complex that housed only students. In the weeks leading up to the incident, she'd noticed items of clothing disappearing and her belongings moving about. Her flatmate had no explanation for what was happening, and they both started to fear something supernatural might be going on, though it only seemed to target Maddie. When she heard the rattling coming from her closet, though, Maddie knew she needed answers. She held the door shut, then asked who was in there. To her surprise, the person that called back said his name was Drew. Drew's real name, as it would turn out, was Andrew Swafford. Maddie asked if he wanted to hurt her. Swafford, of course, said no. Maddie didn't trust him, but could feel the man trying to force the door open. She knew she couldn't keep it closed, so let Swafford out while she told her boyfriend what was happening. Swafford was dressed in Maddie's clothes, including her socks and shoes. While they waited for Maddie's boyfriend to arrive, he went
Okay, I think this guy needs help. This isn't right. This is not right.
into the bathroom to look at himself in the mirror. He told Maddie she was pretty and asked to hug her.
Definitely
Maddie
not right.
refused and later said Swafford didn't touch her. She kept him talking until help arrived. She didn't call police, scared of what he would do if she did what he asked her not to. She did try to make an emergency call on her Apple Watch, but it didn't work. When Maddie's boyfriend arrived, Swafford fled. Police found him just a few blocks away, where he was arrested. Swafford already had a criminal record, mostly for drug-related offenses, and failing to appear in court. He was charged with breaking and entering, identity theft, and possession of stolen goods. It's not clear how long Swafford was in the apartment, or how he got in. It seems unlikely he'd been in the closet the entire time Maddie had noticed clothes going missing. Instead, he probably came from a more secret hiding spot, thinking the students wouldn't be home, and went to the easily accessed closet to wait for Maddie to leave when she arrived unexpected.
Okay, now that's really creepy. That he'd be stalking her like that, or just staying in her house and then asking for a hug. He's a sick individual.
Number 2. A group of students from Ohio State University were left with one more housemate than they were expecting when they moved into an off-campus house in Columbus. The incidents started like a stereotypical haunting. It started as soon as they moved in. Lights would be left on or off, doors left open, and items in the communal areas would be moved apparently without anybody taking responsibility. As there were a large number of people living in the house, 5 on each of the 3 floors, most assumed one of their housemates were responsible and didn't think much of it. The basement was a different matter though. As far as any of them knew, the only thing that was in the basement was a maintenance area. There was a locked door down there, but they assumed it was either storage for the landlord or some other maintenance room. The only time any of them needed to go down there was when the power would randomly stop working on the 2nd floor. This happened more often than they thought should be normal, requiring someone to go down to the basement and flip the circuit breaker. The students complained about the apparently dodgy electronics to the landlord, but nothing was done. While in the basement one day, one of the students, a boy named Brett, heard noises coming from the locked room. He guessed one of his housemates was in the room and tried to open the door, but found it locked. Brett was also the first person to meet the mysterious 16th housemate, though he wouldn't know it at the time. The house was split between 2 groups of friends, 10 on the top 2 floors and 5 on the bottom floor. The 2 groups didn't know one another well. It would just be a nod as they crossed in the hall as they went in or out of the building. So when Brett saw a man he didn't recognize as he came into the house, he assumed it was one of the residents living on the ground floor.
Right, no big deal.
The man called himself Jeremy and seemed to be in a rush to leave. Eventually, the students started to put pieces together. Either the house was haunted, or there was someone unaccounted for who was responsible for the strange occurrences. They did a thorough search of the house, then called the landlord about the basement. The landlord had to force his way into the basement, where he was surprised to find a fully furnished bedroom, complete with student textbooks and framed photographs. The person who lived there wasn't in at the time, but it was clear to see he was coming in and out of a side entrance. The group left a note asking the 16th housemate to call them. Jeremy did, and came back to the house to collect his things and move out. It would turn out Jeremy had lived in the house before the new tenants. The landlord didn't change the locks between tenants, and the keys had no marking warning not to duplicate them. Jeremy had simply kept a copy of his key and had been living rent-free since the start of the new school year.
Smart dude.
After Jeremy moved out, the odd occurrences stopped happening, and the students completed their studies without any other troubles. Number 1. Most stories about people living in strangers' homes without their knowledge are about people looking for a place to stay, or some strange stalker. But there's a good reason why people are fearful things could be worse. In 1941, Theodore Coneys entered the home of a former acquaintance and lived there for almost a year. His illegal residency wouldn't be completely unnoticed though, and Theodore took the life of his acquaintance to keep his secret. It started out like most other entries on this list. At 59 years old, Coneys had spent most of his adult life homeless, mostly due to health conditions that led doctors to believe he wouldn't make it to his 18th birthday. In September of 1941, he had gone to visit Philip Peters. Philip was a well-liked and respected member of the community. He was married to a woman named Helen, and they had 5 children together, though they'd all grown up and moved out by the time the incident occurred. Philip was a retired railroad employee and a musician, and he'd met Coneys at the guitar club where he gave lessons. At the end of the summer, Helen Peters had broken her hip and needed a lengthy stay in the hospital. Not wanting Philip...
Well, wait a minute. If he was working as a railroad worker or whatever, how come he was homeless?
Though they'd all grown up and moved out by the time the incident occurred. Philip was a retired railroad employee and a musician, and he'd met Coneys at the guitar club where he gave lessons. At the end of the summer, Helen Peters had broken her hip and needed a lengthy stay in the hospital. Not wanting Philip to be alone, his neighbors would often invite them to their homes in the evening. It was while Philip was out that Coneys had come to visit. Finding the house empty, Coneys snuck inside. He'd planned to simply steal food and money, but came across something more valuable. A small trap door that led to a crawl space where he decided to make himself at home.
I wouldn't want to
Coneys
stay
lived
in there.
The crawl space for a few weeks, coming out when Philip was out of the house to raid his icebox. On October 17th, Philip came home one evening before Coneys had time to hide and found the intruder in his kitchen. Philip struck him with his cane, but Coneys fought back, taking Philip's life. Rather than running though, Coneys returned to the crawl space where he had been living. Neighbors eventually discovered Philip's remains when he didn't show up for dinner. Police found no sign of forced entry and couldn't explain the crime. They did find the trap door that Coneys was hiding behind, but assumed it was too small for anyone to get through. Helen Peters returned to her home not long after her husband lost her life. She hired a housekeeper to help her look after the building. Both women reported hearing strange noises. It's not surprising, given the violent incident had occurred not long ago, that they both thought the house was haunted.
Yeah.
The housekeeper quit, and Helen eventually moved in with one of her children. Coneys continued to live in the house, having driven its legal residents away. Children in the neighborhood would notice lights turning on and off in the house, and...
I don't know how you could live, knowing that you killed somebody. That's just beyond... I couldn't do it. I'd have to turn myself in to get it off my conscience, get it off my chest,
Rumors that it was haunted spread. Police would often come to check on the house as they thought pranksters had broken in. In July of 1942, they were making one such check when they heard someone upstairs. Going upstairs, they found Coneys. He confessed to everything and was sentenced to life in prison for his crimes.
He's not going to have to worry about a place to stay. Or he didn't have to worry about a place to stay after that. That was in the 40s. Oh, some crazy stuff. Alright. Sex is like playing bridge. If you don't have a good partner, you better have a good hand.
Thank you, everybody. Make sure you like, comment, subscribe, hashtag Mean Gene, all that fun stuff. And if you like this video, tell all your friends, leave a comment down below. And if you didn't like it, then just shut up. And I will see you next time.